Yo, what is up guys? Stelboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So, Gilberto Ramirez defeats Joe Smith Jr. by a 10-round unanimous decision. Of course, this fight actually took place at cruiserweight at 191 pounds. I'm assuming that's where Ramirez is going to be going forwards. Even at cruiserweight against Joe Smith Jr., Ramirez looked big. I've got no idea how this guy was making light heavyweight, let alone super middleweight. But to me, it looked like he was carrying the weight well. Didn't look small at cruiserweight. Joe Smith himself, he was definitely the smaller man in there. Ramirez was bigger, but, Joe Smith himself, in my opinion, looked pretty good in this fight, looked healthy. And, we got a good fight here between Joe Smith and Gilberto Ramirez. I've got a couple of complaints, as I always do. I felt the scorecards were too wide. I felt the right man won in Gilberto Ramirez. I felt he clearly won, but scorecards were way too wide. Giving Joe Smith Jr. one round is a bit of a joke. And also, I'm sure this fight was billed as a 12-rounder, and yet last minute, it seemed it was switched to a 10-rounder. I swear this fight was a 12-rounder initially. Maybe I'm wrong on that, because the way this fight ended, I don't know, man. Those final 2 rounds would have been really interesting. And yeah, it's a shame it wasn't a 12-round fight, because it was a good fight, man. It was a good fight. Ramirez came out boxing behind that southpaw stance, trying to maintain range against Joe Smith. I felt he did that pretty effectively in round 1. I felt when there was space between these two, Ramirez was more effective with his jab. He was finding the straight left hand, also splitting the guard with a long uppercut, picking his shots well from the outside. But Joe Smith was able to get close to Ramirez, with that kind of crowding pressure style, throwing hooks around the side to the head, to the body. And yeah, when Joe Smith got close to Ramirez, he was certainly having success. But having said that, Ramirez on the inside was doing his thing. He wasn't running or, trying to get out of those moments. He was more than happy to engage with Joe Smith Jr. up close in exchanges. And he certainly got his own work off. Landed some good body shots, some good uppercuts to the body, uppercuts to the head, chopping right hooks out of a southpaw stance. He was exchanging with Joe Smith and having success. But ultimately for me in this fight, it was a fight in which Ramirez never had full control of. Joe Smith was always in it, but Ramirez was always a slight step ahead, if that makes sense. I felt in certain rounds he outworked Joe Smith Jr. I certainly felt he showed more variety to his game than Joe Smith Jr. Ramirez was having success on the outside, and on the inside, and at mid-range, whereas Joe primarily was having success in the pocket, in the exchanges. And when those moments were taken away, I felt Ramirez was outboxing Joe. But again, Joe was in there throughout this 10-round fight. He was always there. He was always giving Ramirez trouble. After the halfway point, I had Ramirez up. But, after round 5, the next few rounds, Joe Smith really started to put it on Ramirez. He was crowding Ramirez. He was pushing Ramirez back at times. And he would wail away with those hooks to the head, hooks to the body, plus the overhand right that Joe Smith is so famous for. And he was catching Ramirez. On a couple of occasions, Ramirez had to back up and take a second to collect his thoughts, to regroup. Definitely hurt a couple of times by Joe Smith Jr. But overall, Ramirez took the power pretty well. We know Joe Smith can really crack. And yeah, I felt Joe Smith was really starting to claw his way back into the fight in the late rounds. However, and it looked like Ramirez was fading a little bit, but to Ramirez's credit, in round 10, he actually rebounded and had a really good round. Started boxing on the outside, landing the straight left hand against Joe. He actually landed a really good, I think it was a left uppercut to the body against Joe Smith Jr. And Joe appeared hurt by that body shot. He was covering up. He was, trying to evade Ramirez. Ramirez started to put it on him. And for much of a round, Ramirez was in full control. totally outlanding Joe Smith Jr., landing the better shots. However, last 15 seconds or so of the round, Joe Smith, throws his final roll of the dice, so to speak, catches Ramirez coming in with a massive overhand right, which rocks Ramirez, and the last sort of 5-6 seconds of the round, Ramirez was backpedaling, looking to get to the final bell. So round 10, kind of summarised where the fight was at. I felt Ramirez was outworking Joe Smith. I felt he was landing the better quality work. However, Joe Smith was always there, and round 10 was like a microcosm of that to me. But yeah, I felt Ramirez won. 9 rounds to 1 on all 3 judges' scorecards is way too wide. I'd be thinking more like 7-3, even 6-4 is fair. But yeah, Ramirez definitely won this fight. Now going forwards, can Ramirez have any real success at cruiserweight? Depends on what you define as success. Cruiserweight right now isn't the strongest division. So for example, Noel Givor and Ilunga Makabu are about to fight for the vacant WBC title. To me, Ramirez is or would be competitive against both of those guys. The IBF champion is Chris Billam-Smith. I believe Ramirez is very competitive with Chris Billam-Smith. Ramirez isn't a small cruiserweight. He's not a small cruiserweight. He looked massive in there. And do I believe he could pick up a title? Yeah. As of right now, yes. I'm not saying he is like I'm not saying he'd be the greatest cruiserweight champion, because I certainly don't think that's the case, but could he beat a guy like Chris Billam-Smith on his day? Yeah, maybe. Could he beat the winner of Makabu and Noel Givor? I think it's possible. So yeah, Ramirez definitely has some sort of future at cruiserweight. I don't think he's going to be majorly successful, like having a long reign or anything like that, but he can certainly get a title shot, and against the right guy, maybe even win a title. As for Joe Smith Jr., listen, 34 years old, had a tough career, coming off 2 losses, now badly knocked out by Beterbiev, now this loss. But he showed a lot of heart in this fight. He showed he still has that desire. And with that being said, if I was Joe Smith Jr., I'd probably want to have one final run. The issue with Joe Smith Jr., can he make light heavyweight anymore? That's the issue. But fights like this, listen, Joe Smith is going to deliver. And yeah, these are the sort of fights I want to see Joe Smith take if he continues to fight. These sort of just fun fights, Joe Smith is always entertaining. He's an action fighter, so to speak. And yeah, if I was DAZN, I would consider having Joe Smith Jr. on like high-profile fights on the undercard. I think he's ideal for that type of situation. In fun fights, entertains the crowd. I don't think Joe Smith has to retire, but if he does, I understand. But I do believe he's got a couple fights left. Anyway, share your thoughts below. What did you make of this fight? I enjoyed it. Again, the only issues for me were that it wasn't a 12-rounder and the scorecards were too wide. But yeah, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Delboy, peace.